Have you noticed your grocery bill getting heavier while your shopping cart gets lighter? You are not alone. Over the last 2 decades, a silent crisis has been creeping into European homes. We tracked supermarket prices across the continent from 2005 to 2025 to create the Empty Fridge Index. While a few nations managed to shield their citizens and keep prices frozen in time, others experienced a total economic collapse, with the cost of basic food skyrocketing by over 200%. Today, we will reveal the absolute best and worst performers, exposing exactly why the middle class is struggling to afford daily necessities. But food isn't the only thing slipping out of reach. If you want to know in which European countries buying a house has become mathematically impossible compared to average salaries, type Europe in the comments. Welcome to Amazing Europe. Number 5 among the best, Greece. On paper, this looks like a paradox. Greece is the country of the largest sovereign default in European history, yet its supermarket prices rank among the lowest on the continent. Over the past 20 years, food prices have risen by roughly 61%, far less than in many wealthier European nations. Comparative studies show that a standard grocery basket in Greece typically costs 20 to 30% less than in Germany, France, or the UK. This holds even though Greece applies higher VAT rates on food than most of those countries. Basic items are taxed at 13%, and some still face the full 24% rate. When taxes are higher but shelf prices are lower, someone in the supply chain is absorbing the difference. In Greece, that burden falls on everyone between the farmer and the checkout. Producers, wholesalers, and retailers have all seen margins compressed for years, while chains wage a relentless price war through promotions and own label products. But the real explanation is bleaker. After a decade of austerity, Greek wages and pensions were decimated, and domestic demand collapsed. Households could not afford price increases, so supermarkets learned that even modest rises immediately destroyed volumes. The only viable strategy was to keep food cheap and cut costs everywhere else. The result is an uncomfortable equilibrium. Greek families still spend a disproportionate share of their reduced income on food and utilities, leaving almost nothing for health, education, or savings. Greece earns its place on our best list, not by protecting its people through prosperity, but by keeping prices low through a poorer society. Number 5 among the worst, Iceland. If Greece is the story of a cheap basket in a poor country, Iceland is the opposite. A wealthy society where the supermarket bill feels like a luxury tax. Between 2005 and 2025, food prices jumped by around 175%, turning a high-income nation into one of Europe's most expensive places to buy groceries. 3 structural factors explain why. First, geography. Iceland is a small island in the North Atlantic with no land borders, meaning almost all food arrives by ship or air. High transport costs, harsh weather risks, and the need for larger warehouse stocks all feed directly into the final price. Second, market structure. With just over 370,000 inhabitants, Iceland has no room for genuine retail competition. A handful of groups dominate both supermarkets and fuel stations, creating an oligopoly where margins stay wide and the Greek-style price war simply does not exist. Third, the currency. The Icelandic krona is small and highly volatile. When global conditions shift, capital flows and tourism figures can swing sharply, triggering fast depreciations. Research on exchange rate pass-through confirms that a weaker krona translates quickly into higher prices for imported goods, food above all. On paper, Icelandic wages are high, but food, housing and energy consume a disproportionate share of that income. Iceland lands on our worst list, not because of poor governance or weak productivity, but because a small, remote, oligopolistic and currency-exposed economy converts every external shock into a heavier grocery bill. Number 4 among the best, Portugal. Over the 2 decades from 2005 to 2025, food costs increased by roughly 56%, placing Portugal squarely in the middle of the European rankings, far from the worst performers. Some estimates suggest food is now about 35% more expensive than before the energy crisis. Yet without two key factors, the situation could have been considerably worse. The first is the zero VAT basket. In 2023, the government eliminated VAT, dropping it from 6% to 0% on 46 essential products: bread, milk, pasta, rice, vegetables, fruit, meat, fish, oil, and others. Researchers subsequently tracked over 40,000 daily prices across major chains and found that costs on those items fell by approximately 5.7%, almost exactly mirroring the tax reduction, and remained lower while the measure held. When VAT was restored in early 2024, prices rebounded by around 6%. The cut, in other words, was passed on to consumers almost entirely. It did not disappear into retailers' margins. The second factor is competition. There are various supermarket chains in the country engaged in a relentless battle for market share, flooding the market with loyalty schemes, weekly promotions, and aggressive own-label products, particularly during the inflation surge. Sector data show that recent turnover growth came mainly from volume rather than price increases, meaning consumers responded to price signals by switching to cheaper options, pushing all players to limit further hikes. Portuguese households are still feeling the strain, but an unusually well-executed VAT cut and an intense supermarket price war have helped absorb part of the shock, which is why Portugal features in our best 5. Number 4 among the worst, Bulgaria. In Bulgaria, the problem is not simply that food is expensive, it is that food is expensive relative to Bulgarian incomes. Over the past 20 years, food prices have surged by roughly 179%, one of the steepest increases anywhere in Europe. Eurostat data consistently show that Bulgarian households spend around 30% of their budget on food, the highest share in the entire European Union. In most Western countries, that figure sits below 15%. When prices rise in Germany, people cut back on restaurants or non-essentials. When they rise in Bulgaria, families immediately hit the survival threshold. Over the past 15 years, Bulgaria has caught up with the West in the worst possible way. Major retailers like Kaufland, Lidl, Billa and Metro arrived, built modern stores and gradually pushed prices toward Western European levels. An analysis of the 50 largest chains illustrates what followed. In 2022, supermarket revenues jumped by more than 23%, and much of that growth was not driven by people buying more food, but by prices climbing well above 15% in a single year. For the chains, inflation amplified their turnover. For ordinary families, it punched a hole straight through their monthly budget. Meanwhile, Bulgaria remains at the bottom of EU rankings for both wages and social protection. Temporary VAT cuts on bread and restaurant meals were subsequently reversed, triggering sudden price spikes and adding further pressure on low-income households. Supermarket prices are converging with Western Europe. Wages are not. In a country where food already consumes a third of household income, that gap is precisely what lands Bulgaria near the bottom of our empty fridge index. Before continuing our European ranking, a brief but important aside. Widening the lens to include transcontinental economies tracked by Eurostat and the OECD, 2 countries crash into our list: Turkey and Russia. Over the past 20 years, our index shows food prices rising by approximately 3,837% in Turkey, enough to claim the #1 spot by a vast margin. How is such a figure possible? Not through a single catastrophic year, but through relentless compounding. For years, Erdogan pressured the central bank to cut interest rates, even as inflation surged past 30%, then 50%. Then close to 80% in 2022. Cheap credit combined with a collapsing currency made every imported good, from wheat to oil, dramatically more expensive. Russia tells a different story. The OECD stopped publishing verified data in 2021, but even before the war, Russian food prices had already risen 224% since 2005. Real household incomes fell roughly 10% between 2013 and 2021, and data from earlier inflation spikes showed 1 in 5 Russians could afford only basic necessities. The purchasing power of the Russian middle class was already severely eroded well before recent sanctions compounded the pressure. Number 3, among the best, France. Over the last 20 years, food prices in France have risen by about 56%, much less than in many neighbours. That result is not an accident. First, energy. Around 2/3 of French electricity comes from nuclear power. This means France uses far less gas to produce electricity than countries like Germany or Italy. When gas prices exploded after 2021, the impact on French power bills was softer from the start. Then came the tariff shield. From late 2021, the French government froze regulated gas prices and capped increases in gas and electricity bills at 15%. Studies by the Banque de France estimate that this shield reduced headline inflation by about 2.2 to 2.6 percentage points in 2022 to 2023, at a budget cost of roughly 2.2% of GDP. Without it, household energy bills would have jumped by hundreds of euros per month. For the food chain, this matters a lot. Farmers, food factories, and cold storage warehouses all use huge amounts of energy. If power and gas prices are limited, their production costs rise less, and they are under less pressure to push every euro of extra cost onto supermarket shelves. French households still feel the squeeze, but they start from a stronger position. On average, they spend about 13 to 14% of their budget on food, compared with around 20% or more in several Eastern European countries. So France earns its place in the best group, not because inflation skipped the country, but because nuclear power and the tariff shield acted as a real buffer between the global energy shock and the price of a baguette. Number 3, among the worst, Latvia. Over the past 2 decades, food prices in Latvia have risen by approximately 180%, more than 3 times the increase recorded in France. 2 structural factors explain why the shock hit so hard. The first is energy dependence. Before the war in Ukraine, Latvia relied almost entirely on Russian gas, with some estimates placing the figure close to 100% of supply. When those flows were cut, Latvia was forced to turn rapidly to alternative and far costlier sources. The consequences were immediate. In 2022, the country recorded one of the highest inflation rates in the EU, averaging around 17%. With food prices climbing more than 25% and housing-related costs rising by nearly 47% year-on-year by early 2023. The second factor is the wage gap. Latvian households still allocate a significantly larger share of income to food than their Western European counterparts, roughly 20% of the consumption budget, compared with 13 to 14% in France. Research by the Bank of Latvia found that during the 2022 to 2023 shock, the cheapest products rose in price faster than premium items, meaning poorer households, who rely almost exclusively on basic options, absorbed a disproportionate share of the burden. The adoption of the euro in 2014 played only a marginal role. Official studies estimate it added just 0.2 percentage points to prices that January. The deeper dynamic is structural. Latvian prices are converging toward Western European levels far more quickly than Latvian wages. For a family already spending €1 in 5 on food, every new price surge is not a minor inconvenience. Number 2 among the best, Ireland. Over the last 20 years, food prices here have risen by only 16% in our index. Part of the explanation is income. Ireland's official GDP is inflated by the profits of tech and pharma multinationals, So statisticians use a corrected measure called modified gross national income to describe the real economy. Even after this correction, Irish households are among the richest in Europe. That matters when prices move, but the key is how little of that income goes on food. Eurostat data show that Irish households spend about 8% of their budget on food and non-alcoholic drinks, compared with roughly 14% for the EU average. In Eastern Europe, many families spend more than 20%. So even when prices rise, the hit on Irish wallets is relatively small. Then there is the supermarket price war. Market share data show a tight five-way fight between Dunnes, Tesco, SuperValu, Lidl and Aldi. Each time one chain cuts the price of bread, milk or pasta, the others follow. Irish media talk of a constant grocery price war, and recent surveys put annual grocery inflation at around 6 to 7%, far from the double-digit spikes seen in the Baltics or Balkans. Put all this together, high incomes, low food share and fierce competition, and you get our Celtic anomaly. A country where the economy on paper is distorted by multinationals, but where the average family still feels the supermarket as a manageable expense. Number 2, among the worst, Serbia. Over the past 2 decades, food prices in Serbia have risen by roughly 228% according to our index. Eurostat data now places Serbian food prices at around 96% of the EU average, higher than in Poland, Romania or Bulgaria. The core problem is a mismatch. Serbian families earn far less than their EU counterparts. The average Serbian household can spend only about 67% of what an average EU family can. In practice, people face near European shelf prices with significantly lighter wallets. How did this happen? 3 factors stand out. First, an incomplete transition. When the state withdrew from price controls, genuine competition did not fill the gap. A handful of large supermarket chains now dominate food retail, while traditional markets and small shops have declined. In this environment, cost increases pass to consumers quickly. Efficiency gains do not. Second, a fragile agricultural base. Serbian farming relies heavily on small, undercapitalized operations with limited machinery and poor credit access. When fertilizer and energy costs spiked in 2022, these farms had no buffer. Some producer groups warned that nitrogen fertilizer shortages alone could reduce harvests by up to 70%, pushing costs and prices sharply upward. Third, economic policy choices. Minimum wages and public spending have grown faster than productivity. In a small, open economy, this tends to generate domestic inflation rather than genuine improvements in living standards. The outcome? Serbia has effectively imported EU price levels without importing EU incomes. The Balkan shockwave does not stop in Serbia. It spills into Albania, Montenegro and Kosovo. These countries are absent from the 2005 to 2025 ranking because harmonised Eurostat food price series only begin in 2015. But in that shorter window, Albania emerges as one of Europe's worst cases. Food prices rose by roughly 60 to 70% between 2015 and 2025, placing it among the continent's top 10 for food inflation. A rural country might be expected to weather food shocks better, but Albania shows the opposite. Agriculture is dominated by small, undercapitalized farms with limited mechanisation and poor access to finance, keeping unit costs high. Meanwhile, Albania imports a large share of its food and nearly all key inputs: fertilizers, animal feed, fuel, meaning global price spikes pass through rapidly to local shelves. Because incomes remain low, this dynamic collides hard with Engel's law. Albanian families now devote around 40% of monthly expenditure to food and non-alcoholic drinks, a record level in Europe. The consequence is stark. Every new wave of imported inflation acts as a flat tax on survival. forcing households to cut back on both quantity and quality just to keep eating. Number 1 among the best, Switzerland. In your empty fridge index, Switzerland is the outlier in the rich world. Food prices rise by only about 6% between 2005 and 2025. While much of Europe doubles or triples supermarket prices, the Swiss fridge is almost frozen in time. The main shield is the strong Swiss franc. Since the late 2000s, the franc has appreciated sharply against the euro, moving from about 0.6 euro per franc to rough parity, because investors treat it as a safe haven currency. A stronger franc makes imported food, energy and fertilizers cheaper in local currency, crushing imported inflation before it reaches Swiss shelves. Unlike euro area countries, Switzerland is not tied to the European Central Bank. The Swiss National Bank targets very low inflation and can lean against shocks without worrying about the Italian or Spanish business cycle. On top of that, Switzerland runs one of the most protectionist agricultural regimes in Europe, with high border tariffs, tariff rate quotas, and large direct subsidies to farmers. This system keeps domestic food structurally expensive, but in exchange, it delivers stability and food security. Prices are high, yet they move very little when global markets swing. Reverse engineering your index? A reference monthly food basket that cost 500 francs in 2005 would now cost roughly 532 francs. Only about 32 francs more per month in 20 years. For a European fridge, that is as close to a fortress as it gets. Before revealing the European country where prices have increased the most, if you found this video informative, we kindly ask you to support our project by giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the notification bell so you don't miss our new videos. And remember, if you want to know which European countries have become mathematically impossible to buy a home in compared to average salaries, write Europe in the comments. Number 1 among the worst, Hungary. Hungarian food prices have exploded by 244% over the past 20 years. Part of the story is the weak currency. The forint repeatedly slid against the euro, meaning every spike in global energy and food prices was heavily magnified at the border. Another factor was government policy. Before the 2022 elections, the government pumped money into the economy through massive tax rebates and bonuses, while the central bank was too slow to raise interest rates. People suddenly had extra cash, allowing businesses to easily hike prices because consumer demand was artificially high. But Hungary's worst damage was homemade by decree. From 2022, the government forced shops to freeze prices on basic foods like sugar, flour, and chicken at 2021 levels. Why did this fail so badly? When supermarkets are forced to sell items below cost, they simply stop stocking them, creating empty shelves and rationing. To survive the losses, retailers aggressively raised prices on all unregulated food items. When the caps were finally removed in 2023, the artificially suppressed prices rebounded explosively. On top of this, Budapest tripled its special taxes on large retail chains. Companies passed these costs straight to shoppers, compounding the world record 27% VAT. Reverse engineering your index. A monthly supermarket bill that was roughly €110 in 2005 now lands closer to €380, about 270 extra euros every month for the same basket. We've seen that an empty fridge is rarely a coincidence. Across Europe, food prices exploded due to a toxic mix, heavy reliance on imported energy and fertilizers, weak currencies collapsing under global shocks, a lack of supermarket competition, and disastrous government price caps. On the flip side, the few nations that tamed inflation relied either on exceptionally strong currencies and protectionism or on aggressive government intervention and high supermarket competition to shield their citizens. The era of cheap food in Europe is over, and the middle class is paying the bill. Now, I want to hear from you. From which country are you watching? And how much has your real grocery bill increased compared to 5 or 10 years ago? Let me know in the comments below. To get a clearer picture of the situation, we recommend watching this video, where we'll explore the 10 European countries with the highest number of people at risk of poverty. And there will be several unexpected countries. That's all for this video. See you next time.